Adam, you ready?
Yep.
All right, good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. We're concluding our Lab Safety Awareness Week here at K-State University. Thank you for everybody's been listening in and who took time this morning on a snowy morning to also pull up on Zoom. I want to introduce Dr. Grady today for our last segment here. He's a three-peat Kansas State graduate. He has a bachelor's degree and he has a master's degree, and he is a doctor of veterinary medicine in 2003. In 2008, he completed his residency training at K-State, where he specialized in equine internal medicine. And in 2009, became a diplomat of the American College of Veterinary and Internal Medicine. After 8 years in private practice, Dr. Grady joined the clinical faculty in 2015 at College of Veterinary Medicine here at K-State, where he led the equine reproduction section. In 2022, Dr. Grady was selected to serve as the university attending veterinarian and director of the comparative medicine group. In these roles, Dr. Grady and his staff oversees the animal welfare and health for teaching and research animals here at K-State University. With that, I introduce Dr. Grady.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting our group to be part of this week. It looks like it was a very successful week with lots of good speakers as part of the Lab Safety Awareness Week here at K-State. And so happy to be here and happy to share a little bit about what we do within our comparative medicine group here at K-State. There we go. So kind of break this up in this talk into and kind of two different pieces today. And the first part here is kind of want to share about who we are. Because our comparative medicine group is a fairly small group across campus. I kind of want to share a little bit about what we do to help support the research community here at K-State. And this slide comes from the American Association of Laboratory Animal Science. But to kind of start off with, I want to share with, we're here to kind of take care and it says our animals, but really it's to take care of your animals when we think of the research community and the teaching community of animals here as well. So as I mentioned, we're a fairly small group. There's 3 clinical veterinarians, including myself. And then we have about 12 laboratory animal technicians, with a wide range of years of service here and years of experience. We've got most of our staff anywhere from 6 months up to about 25 years. And so, we lean heavily on the individuals in our group that have been here for the 22 and 25 years. But we benefit from some of the energy of some of our new young staff as well. We report to, or we are housed under the vice president of research, and we do have a campus-wide presence, meaning that we provide the animal husbandry, the animal welfare, the animal oversight, animal care and management to a number of animals, and we'll talk about some of those species here in a little bit. But from north part of campus on into the main campus here, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of these local and federal and state regulations that we follow and we report to, but they play a very instrumental role in how we interact and how we maintain ourselves and how we interact with the research community, from everywhere from facilitating the animal use in research animals, but also teaching animals through the different departments of the university. We assist many of those with procurement of animals, as I already mentioned, the health management, animal husbandry, oversight of animal welfare, and probably a couple of the big ones here at the bottom is going to be animal enrichment. When we think about animals that are housed for research or housed for teaching, one of the big focuses for us, and especially when we look at some of the regulatory bodies, the Animal Welfare Act, the guide for animal care and use, animal enrichment is a major part. We want to make sure that those animals have as close to a natural socialization and natural environment as they can. And then we look at biosecurity and biocontainment. And so from a biosecurity standpoint, we want to prevent animal diseases from coming into a population of animals, but also knowing that we work with animals and we work with researchers that might be utilizing an infectious agent. So we want to make sure that we maintain and contain that infectious agent into a room, and don't let it out into other animals or into the rest of the facility by any means. So biosecurity, biocontainment, and animal enrichment may not be things that we think of a great deal when we look at the list prior to that, but makes up a major component of our daily care of these animals. So when we think of biomedical research, it is the area of basic and applied science that investigates ways to prevent and treat diseases that affect humans and animals. And here at K-State, a large part of our role in comparative medicine is obviously on the animal side of things, but knowing that a lot of the research that these animals are being utilized for, the teaching that these animals are going to be used for, goes and impacts humans as well. And the next several slides, we're kind of going to look at some myths and facts, but here, animals make a good model for most of research because they're biologically similar to many of the animals that we utilize or are utilized in research are biologically similar to humans. And we look at the rodent population, mice share approximately 98% of the DNA with humans. Swine, which make up a large population of research animals, they're used for a large part in skin, wound healing, cardiovascular disease, organ transplant. So they make up a large proportion and a very critical role within animal research. And knowing that a lot of the animals that are utilized in research also have some of the same health problems as humans. And so a lot of research is done to cure and prevent and treat cancer, to cure, prevent, and treat diabetes, heart disease. A lot of that research starts out in the animal research population. We think about HIV vaccination studies. Feline immunodeficiency virus is a perfect model to try to help understand the disease. And so for us, when we think about one medicine, where humans and animals play a role, animals play a major role in vaccine development, antibiotic development, the development and use of anesthetics. Insulin was first developed through the use of some dogs many years ago. Treatment and understanding of asthma, treatment of high blood pressure, and as I mentioned already, how we can treat, how we can prevent, how we can understand cancer, and hopefully someday find a cure. So as I mentioned, we're looking at some myths and facts, and we could go through a long list of these myths and facts, but I just picked a few. And so one, that animal research cannot predict how medications will affect humans. And I already showed the slide previously where we said, many of the animals share some of the same diseases. Many of the animals have, a DNA that's very similar to human. A paper that was reported in 2018 that of the 216 Nobel Prizes that have been awarded over the years in physiology and medicine, 180 of those Nobel Prizes utilized animals as part of their research model. And so meaning that over 80% of research for physiology and medicine has been utilized through the use of and learned through the use of animals in research. And I just showed this diagram looking at anatomy of a human and anatomy of a mouse or a rat or a rodent of some sort, very similar anatomy. And so many of the same diseases that we see in humans, we can try to get a better understanding through the use of animals. Not a comprehensive list. When we think of animals and the use of research, use of animals in teaching, a lot of different animals than what you commonly would think of as being a part of a research model. I already mentioned pigs play a large role in plastic and reconstructive surgery, cardiovascular research. A lot of work is done in vaccine development with pigs. Sheep pregnancy research, fetal alcohol syndrome has been studied in those. The vaccines for anthrax, horses vaccines have been developed through horses for tetanus. studies looking through at diphtheria. Look at the other side, look at chickens, and we think of, avian influenza being a major industry concern for backyard chicken people raising chickens backyard, as well as the poultry industry. And so a lot of research is being done in chickens to help identify and develop vaccines and prevent avian influenza from spreading. So most experiments are performed on monkeys, dogs, and cats, and that couldn't be further from the truth. But that's what many will tell us that are outside of the research industry. And in fact, that 99% of the animal research is done in species other than dogs, monkeys, and cats. And so this slide comes from the American Association of Laboratory Animal Science, and what we see here is the kind of the pink or purple piece of the pie here is 0.75% of total encompass use of animals in research. The yellow piece of the pie here are other species, and then the blue is the rodents, the rats and the mice. And here, K-State, it might look a little bit different. One, we don't have non-human primates, so there's no research done here. But being part of tied to an agricultural university, a land-grant university, tied to animal science with the vet school, we certainly may see a larger percentage of research done through the use of some of the livestock species. A lot of the serology studies trying to identify and understand different foreign animal diseases. And so maybe we have a slightly larger piece of the yellow pie here, but still the percentage is going to be very similar to this, or the makeup is going to be very similar. The rodents are going to make up a large percentage of the research here, as it does in most institutions, but then we may see a slightly more larger portion through the use of some of the livestock species. And lastly, there are no laws or regulations that govern the use of animals in research, and the animal research industry is highly regulated at the federal level as well as the local level, and we'll kind of look at some of those regulatory bodies that govern us, but these are just a few of the guides that we utilize on a routine basis to help guide us through facility management, guide us through heating and air, HVAC system, guides us through animal enrichment, guides us how many animals can be housed in a area based on square foot or based on square inches of a cage, socialization of animals, and all these different types of things. So we utilize the Guide for the Care and Use of Laboratory Animals a great deal, the Animal Welfare Act, as well as for those livestock agricultural types of species, the Guide for Care and Use of Agricultural Animals in research and teaching. So on that same thought process, some of those governing bodies that we are that we report to, that we are governed by in the research community. One here locally is just our Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. Many of us will know that as IACUC, and we'll talk about that in more detail later. I mentioned the Animal Welfare Act with the USDA. Research facilities, teaching facilities are going to get inspected by the USDA on at least an annual basis. We don't have a lot of direct, or like CMG, it doesn't have a lot of direct interaction with the FDA, but recognize that any research that is being done for new medications, medical devices, chemical compounds, FDA is going to require that those are tested on animals before moving into human trials. The Guide for Care and Use of Laboratory Animals comes from the Institute of Laboratory Animal Research, which is as I mentioned, that's one of the textbooks, one of the guides that we use heavily. Any research that is NIH funded will be governed by the Public Health Services Policy and the Humane Care and Use of Laboratory Animals. And then lastly, that Guide for the Care and Use of Agricultural Animals is published and produced by the American Society of Animal Science. So a lot of governing bodies that we have to look to for information. and make sure that we are maintaining animal welfare to the highest level. And then there are a few, I say a few institutions, but well over 1,000 worldwide, internationally, that choose to be part of another governing body, and that is the Association for the Assessment and Accreditation of Laboratory Animal Care International. And K-State is one of those members. We pay to be a member of this organization. We pay for them to provide oversight to us to make sure that we are taking those standards that are set forth by the guide for the care and use of laboratory animals and the guide and care and use for animals used in agriculture and the Animal Welfare Act. And we want to make sure that we are meeting those and exceeding those. And so the ALAC is an organization that makes sure that holds these institutions that sign up to be part of this to be to meet a higher standard. And we just this last fall just went through our every 3-year reaccreditation. Went well, waiting to hear back from them. But K-State has been a member of ALAC for well over 20 years that I know of. So what is IACUC? And IACUC is kind of that local governing body. And so they utilize many of the guides that we've already talked about. But they make sure that the animal welfare is well taken care of here at K-State. And the guides that we mentioned, they require for the IACUC to be a fully functioning IACUC, have to have at least 5 members. K-State, we have a very robust IACUC. Well more than the 5 members that's required. But in that 5 that is required to be on the IACUC committee, it has to have at least 1 veterinarian with experience in laboratory animal medicine, has to have at least 1 practicing scientist, 1 member of a non-scientific area, and a community member. So try to make sure that, so it wants to ensure that all bodies have a C, and not that it's just all governed by veterinarian, not that it's all governed by the scientists that are performing the research. We want to make sure that there are other people representing the community and the animal population to make sure that research is done and animal welfare is performed at the highest level. And so just some of the responsibilities of the IACUC here at K-State and at other institutions is that required to do a semi-annual review of the humane care and use of animals, semi-annual review of animal facilities. So twice a year, members of the IACUC will go to all the animal research facilities, all the teaching where animals are utilized for teaching, and inspect those facilities and inspect records to make sure that everything the animals are being taken care of. So they're going to review and approve research protocols. So before a research project can even take place at an institution, it has to have IACUC approval. Any animal welfare concerns that might develop, they're going to review those and help determine whether how to mitigate those welfare concerns and report to any of the regulatory bodies that we may need to, as well as the institutional officer here at K-State. And then they are going to, if there are any welfare concerns or safety concerns, they have the authority to stop any activity on that study at that time. So anytime we think about research, a lot of the things that we hear and talk about are the 3 R's, and that's to help improve animal research. And one of those is replace. And so are there ways that we and IACUC committee, myself as the attending veterinarian, will look to make sure that are there ways that we can replace animal research with alternatives? And so anytime a new research protocol is submitted, we look for ways to replace. Can we find an alternative way? Reduce. Are there ways that we can, to the minimum number of animals that need to be utilized for a teaching or a research protocol, how can we make sure that we're using the minimum numbers? And then refine and identify ways that if there's going to be any sort of pain that may be associated, how can we mitigate? How can we alleviate pain? How can we reduce any evidence of anything that might develop from the research project? So that was the kind of about the who we are, and now I will move into kind of probably what we're really, brought here to talk about, and that is, the safety in the animal facility. And so when I think about animal research, there are four different levels of biosafety, and for us, an animal biosafety level. So BSL 1, BSL 2, 3, and 4, and so we within the comparative medicine group, our facilities are allowed to perform BSL 1 and BSL 2 studies. Now, there are other facilities on campus that are allowed to perform BSL 3 and BSL 4 type of work. So basically, as we increase in level of biosafety levels, the risk of exposure, the risk of animals to be able to transmit the disease through aerosolization, the more exotic or foreign that disease is, the higher the level of the BSL 1, 2, 3, or 4 will be. So when we think of BSL 1, there's very little chance that we're not really dealing with an infectious agent, and not known to cause any disease in immunocompetent adults, and there's minimal risk to laboratory personnel. When we look at BSL 2, we oftentimes are going to be working with some degree of a infectious agent, and it has been associated or could be associated with human disease and pose some hazard to the personnel or the environment. And so as we increase the level of biosecurity, level of biocontainment that we mentioned in one of the early slides is going to increase as well. And I mentioned, there are other facilities across campus or other institutions that are allowed to do, BSL 3 and BSL 4 work. And again, as each of those increase in the infectious agent or the disease that they're studying, the high containment, high biosecurity is going to be in those BSL 4 type of studies. When we think of, Plum Island or NBAF from one of the speakers earlier in the week, they are allowed to do the BSL 3 and especially the BSL 4 work as well. So when we think of using laboratory animals, as I mentioned earlier, institutional approval, research cannot happen without approval here through the IACUC committee or without institutional approval. So I mentioned IACUC already. Institutional Biosafety Committee, the IBC, also plays a role when we're looking at agents or pathogens that could impact humans. And then we need to make sure that procedures are performed by properly trained personnel and directed by qualified people. And so the clinical veterinarians, myself and our other 2 clinical veterinarians, kind of at the top of that, where we make sure that we understand the disease process. So when we work with our laboratory animal technicians, we can advise them, one, from an animal management, animal care standpoint, animal disease aspect, how we should be able to maintain biosecurity, biosafety, and keep our people safe and keep the animals safe as well. But then also we have, the principal investigators that we are working with, that we are advising, the research team. They certainly know the disease process that they're working with, but we need to make sure that they understand the animal welfare side of those things as well. And then we have student workers, and student workers may make up part of our our staff, but also there's going to be student workers that are going to be part of research teams. And so we need to, from top to bottom, we need to make sure that we have good communication and a good understanding of the animal care, animal husbandry, animal welfare aspect. And we do this in a number of ways. Is one, we need to train these people on animal handling and moving. At a lot of institutions, they may just have a vivarium with the rodent population. Here at K-State, we have the rodent population, we have livestock species as well. And so, training those staff where they're going to be working at, make sure they know how to handle those animals and move them properly. Teach everybody on this list of people how to monitor animal health, especially so we make sure that we're maintaining the optimum health in those animals, understanding the animal husbandry, how to work around those animals. If treatments or diagnostics need to be performed, make sure they're being performed adequately. Every member that is part of any of these lists, they go through university required CITI training, and we can specify it to what area they're going to be working with or what animals they're going to be working with. And then we're going to have standard operating procedures for everything we do. And then even further down, for each individual project, we're going to develop, the clinical veterinarian team is going to develop project-specific SOPs that's going to advise our staff, the research teams, how we enter a room, how we exit a room, what the PPE requirements are going to be, what the animal monitoring plan is going to be. So every project is going to have a specific set of SOPs that go along with that project. And then ultimately, through all this, hopefully that our facilities, our methods of animal care should allow for the state of well-being and comfort for those animals while they're here at K-State. Part of our safety plan is part with occupational health and safety. And so, large part that's to, one, protect our employees. As I mentioned earlier, there might be infectious agents that are utilized. There's animal handling injuries certainly can happen from that aspect. We want to protect the integrity of the research. We want to protect the environment of that facility, environment outside the facility, protect our community, and then ultimately protect the animals as well. And that encompasses everything in our occupational health and safety plan. And so we're going to identify what the hazards of those animals are, meaning, are we dealing with, bites and scratches? Are we dealing with the possibility of being kicked? We're going to look at the hazards associated with maybe the infectious agent that might be utilized. We're going to create an assessment plan. That's going to be done at the level of IACUC or IBC, working with EH&S in some instances. We're going to train our personnel properly. We're going to make sure that they practice good hygiene. We talk about shower in, shower out from certain facilities. Make sure that we're wearing the proper PPE. Make sure that our facilities are adequately functioning, and making sure that our HVAC system is working. We'll talk here a little bit later when we talk about air pressures and airflow in and out of rooms. And then part of that occupational health is that all of our members of our staff are going to go through annual medical evaluations with our occupational health clinician. And then for those that are required to wear some sort of respirator, whether it be an N95 or a PAPR of some sort, they're going to go through respirator fit test and annual training to make sure that they are safe and well to be wearing these type of systems. And why is occupational health so important? One is, some of the conditions, diseases are zoonotic, meaning they can be transferred from animal to human. And in some instances, there could be a reverse zoonosis from human to animal. Most of what we're concerned with are going to be those zoonotic diseases, that could be transferred. And not that we haven't done any in my time any rabies research, but certainly rabies would be a disease that, most people would be aware of that certainly could be transferred from animal to human. All different types of allergens. I mentioned briefly earlier, bites, scratches, kicks, certainly an occupational risk when we work with the animals. We're going to be working with allergens that may be coming from the animal or may be associated with the bedding, or it could be the bedding may be contaminated. We have to make sure we handle that appropriately. Talk about infectious agents that the animal may be shedding in their bodily fluids, or they may be shedding aerosolized. And so understanding the disease, understanding the mechanism of disease spread is critical. Then we look at ergonomics and lifting 50-pound bags of feed and or getting down and cleaning. Certainly hearing stresses are something that in some of our animal populations could be a concern. It's reported there's a lot of different numbers out there, but kind of the common number that I found was hearing stresses can start to be felt or could be affected at over 85 decibels. And maybe the chronicity of that could play a role in that. But we know that pigs can be quite loud. And one of the numbers that I found that a pig squeal can be as high as 130 decibels, and dogs barking can be as high as 110. And certainly we do take care of pigs and dogs, and so making sure that our staff are aware of the hearing protection to prevent any long-term hearing stress. And then chemicals from a lot of the disinfectants that we use, make sure that we're handling those safe as well. So this paper is from 2005, so almost 20 years ago, but I just looking at work-related accidents, and this is just veterinarians alone, so it's not necessarily laboratory animal related, but veterinarians alone. But they looked at 10,000 veterinary practices, and this was in the United Kingdom. And of those 10,000, this survey of 10,000 practices, there was 27,000 veterinarians or staff that reported. And in that, over a 3-year time frame, they on average they saw over 2,000 accidents or occupational claims each year. And they compared that to human practitioners or practitioners in human medicine, and found that to be 3 times higher than human practitioners, and the 9 times higher risk for severe injury. And severe injury was defined as missing more than 3 days of work due to the injury. And so most of those are going to be cuts, bites from the rodents, scratches, and from rodents, dogs, cats, and then kicks, obviously, from some of our larger animals, cattle and horses. Most of the staff that was reported to have those incidents, small animals had a higher report of the staff. So that would be kind of similar to our laboratory animal staff that take care of the animals. And then veterinarians had a higher injury rate when they were looking at the livestock, the cattle species. Just looking at some occupational disease risk that they defined as skin diseases or allergies to respiratory disease, allergic skin diseases, or infectious diseases, they had the veterinary community had almost 3 times higher incidence than human practitioners. Then they went ahead and reported some fatal work-related accidents, and 6 of those were veterinarians driving from farm to farm. But one of those was a complication due to a dog bite. And so, so it does show that, the more time we spend working with animals, the greater the risk of some of the injuries might be. And I was clinical practice for 20 years and working on horses, and I can say in those 20 years I had 3 injuries. One was a bite. When I decided I was going to do equine, I told everybody I'd rather take the chance of getting kicked by a horse and bit or scratched by a dog or cat. Well, my second week of work, I got bit by a horse. My second month of work, I got reared up on my second day of work, I got kicked. My second week of work, I got bit. And my second month, I got reared up on and came down. After those first 2 months, it was pretty clear sailing. But injuries do happen. And even though when we think that we're doing everything we can to minimize the risk, anytime we're working with animals, that risk does exist. And for our staff right now, and most of the risk are probably rodent bites when handling mice or rats. Some of the allergies, most of these are going to be associated with proteins that are being excreted in the urine or saliva or skin dander of some sort of animals that are commonly worked with. Bedding, certainly some of the dust or molds that might be in bedding as well, or some of the proteins that are excreted in those urine. And we certainly take action to preventative measures to try to prevent that. But then we also have to understand that many of our staff, these allergies may be outside of the workplace and be associated with, other exposures outside, non-occupational related to the actual work itself. And so ways that how can we try to prevent that? One is minimize our risk of duration of exposure, the frequency or intensity. try to, recognize if people have previous allergic conditions or, may develop allergies to other conditions as well. And are they have predisposing conditions? Are they, illnesses? Are they immunocompromised? Do they have pets at home that might be predisposing them to being exposed to allergens as well? And so there are ways that we can certainly try to prevent that. Biosafety cabinets or some sort of animal transfer cage that has, unidirectional airflow, laminar airflow of some sort. Certainly filter top cages or ventilated cage racks that help circulate the air, identifying bedding that is low in dust, trying to minimize animal density in a cage or in a pen. Proper humidity. It's been shown that allergies are higher when humidity increases. And so we try to maintain a humidity in our animal rooms 30 to 70%. Wearing personal protective equipment, PPE, when required, and employee education. And even one reference I found that said employee selection. And I suppose that I don't know how we could do that. But I certainly think we can address many of these. And if we do identify, employee with allergies to a certain exposure, we can try to move them to a different area within our department. So this is one of the caging systems that we have here. We have all different types of caging systems across campus. There's, from open top caging to filter top caging to ventilated cage racks. And so this is a similar system to what we have. This is a ventilated system. And so we have HEPA filtrated air that's being pumped into the cage, and then it's circulated out through the exhaust air. If for some reason the filtration system, we lost power or whatever, these cages are still, they're filter top as well. So it's still filter air, room air into and out of the cage as well. But as I mentioned, so this is one of the systems that we have that try to help minimize a lot of things, minimize ammonia buildup. We really try to minimize ammonia buildup by doing frequent cage changes. So ammonia doesn't have a chance to build up, minimize the animal density. So that's not a lot of urine buildup or ammonia buildup within a cage. Then also, the filtration systems on these cages. And then I mentioned, some sort of animal transfer cage. This is a dump station, biosafety cabinets, animal transfer cabinet. And so all these are going to have some sort of unidirectional or laminar type of airflow, but also recognize that, most of these are using some sort of face mask filtration system as required by the IACUC, the IBC, the protocol itself. And so, other ways that we can try to maintain animal health within a population is, procure animals from reputable vendors. And so, as I mentioned early on in the slides, we try to work with the research teams and try to help them with the procurement system. There's very few vendors across the U.S. For the different types of animals that might be utilized, and so identifying those reputable vendors. But we can, especially for the vivariums and the rodent populations, they have health statuses within each of those rooms. So we can go to a room and say we want animals from that room because they are free of whatever disease, whatever infectious agent it might be. Same way with if we procure a large animal, livestock species, we can specify what health status we want in those animals. And if they can't meet that health status, then they are not a qualified or valued vendor at that time. I mentioned earlier, those detailed project specific SOPs, that just takes it down to the closest level to all of our staff, to the animals, to the research teams. We follow strict room orders. So we go from a room that maybe has a naive population of animals or maybe immunocompromised group of animals. And so we want to start there first. So we don't take the risk of taking an infectious agent from one room by accident into another room. entry and exit requirements, right? So how we don and doff our PPE. Do we have to shower in to go to a room? Do we have to shower out when we leave a room? Have controlled access to animal housing areas, so only specific staff or people can get back there. Require what mandatory PPE is required for a facility or for a room. Understand quarantine requirements, meaning if I go into a room that has a select agent and then that's housing pigs, I may be due to a 5-day quarantine that I can't go to another room that has pigs. Or if I have pigs at home, which I can't go back to my home or back to those pigs for that period of time. Recognizing, I mentioned the HVAC systems earlier and negative and positive pressure in and out of a room. So before we go into a room that has a pressure monitoring system, if it's an animal room, we want that room to have negative pressure. We want, if there is infectious agent in that room, we want to make sure the airflow is coming into that room versus blowing out of the room, so we can maintain that biocontainment. Or other rooms that are cage wash area or clean sided cage wash, we want to have positive pressure because we want things blowing out of that room because that's a clean room. We don't want to be sucking things into that room. So knowing those things, and so we annually, every couple of years, we have to measure those, and our systems that we can monitor those through a monitoring system. Then we may, if there is a disruption, then we have to correct that before we can go in and out of that room. Maintaining personal hygiene and make sure, offer, if there is a agent-specific vaccine that's available, we have to make sure that our animal workers at least have it available to them or have a declination from them if they choose not to get such a vaccine. Influenza might be one of those. For COVID research that might be going on, those become some of the common ones that we could think of. So I mentioned shower in, shower out. I mentioned the quarantine, our cage wash area. We need to make sure weekly we make sure that our cage wash is meeting adequate temperatures that's required. Autoclave, working with EH&S to validate autoclave systems here across campus, but helpful for us within CMG. So there's things from an equipment standpoint that will help us make sure that our equipment, our bodies are clean going from one room to the next. And then PPE, and so ideally this is to protect ourselves from any zoonotic disease, but also protects that reverse zoonosis that I mentioned earlier. Each facility that we are part of, whether we are going to have facility specific clothing, whether it's lab coat, whether it's scrubs, whether it's clean outdoor coveralls, whatever it might be, we're going to make sure we have that facility clothing available. Make sure we have dedicated room PPE. What we wear in from a PPE standpoint into one room may look very different to what we wear into another room based on the requirements. Many of that might be Tyvek, as I mentioned, a lab coat. Most of the time we're talking about double gloves, safety glasses, shoe covers, a bouffant or hair cover, and then a respirator or mask in many situations. And maybe it's just a surgical mask, but oftentimes it may be an N95 or it may be a PAPR. So these are just some examples, obviously, that you're all aware of. A lot of our staff may just work in scrubs and a lab coat. Some of our other staff that are, when we're talking about BSL2 work, are going to be working in some sort of Tyvek. Shoe covers to prevent, so we're not taking, who knows what's in a hallway, and even though our hallway is clean, we want to make sure that we're not going to transfer anything from just on the soles of our shoes. So wearing clean shoe covers in and out of rooms. Talked about, the type of mask, whether it's just an N95, whether it's a full respirator or a pack. So handling standpoint, I certainly said bites and scratches certainly can make up a big portion of our occupational hazards or risks. And so teaching our staff, Dr. Park is our clinical veterinarian, mostly in charge of the rodent, the population, the vivarium. So making sure that our staff, make sure the research teams know how to properly restrain, as well as just pick up and maintain and move a mouse from one cage to the next. There are restrainers that are available, especially if we need to do a tail bleed or a to collect blood from a mouse or something. Oftentimes, some of the research will be done under anesthesia as well. But rat bite fever is one of the common risks associated with bites, and so those are caused by Streptobacillus monoiformis and Spirillum minis. And then our livestock species, certainly the bites, the kicks, potentially getting trampled, slips, falls, certainly play a role, right? And so some of these things, it's hard to fully restrain an animal. Utilization of a set of equine stocks will help prevent injury. We think about our different species themselves. So, our sheep, our goats, our small ruminants are usually fairly flock oriented. And so if we take one sheep or one goat away from that flock, it could cause some anxiousness. Pigs, they're usually small, but they can be, kind of like little linebackers and come and hit you at the knee, and they can bite. And so we do see bites from pigs as well. It's possible that somebody could get trampled, especially when we think about some of our large species. Not routinely, but there is some deer research that goes on occasionally. So there are things that we do need to properly train how to restrain animals. There's not a real good chute system, and so there's different types of ways to restrain a pig, and same way with the sheep and goats. Moving animals, talk about teaching our animal staff how to handle as well as move animals. And so, when we think about, pick that mouse or the rat and how we pick them up from the cage and move them over, well, here, most of our animals, especially cattle, aren't broke to lead. And so we have to understand positioning ourselves in order to get an animal to move, right? And so kind of use the shoulder. This is kind of neutral zone right here. And so if I work myself back, and then there's also this flight zone, right? So we work around this point of balance about the level of the shoulder and the flight zone. And so if I move myself back and I'm outside of the flight zone, that animal may not move. But if I move into his flight zone, hopefully if I'm behind it, he's going to move forward, versus if I'm to the front of that shoulder, hopefully that animal's going to turn around and go back. They have almost 360-degree vision, but recognize that there is a blind spot directly behind them. And that would fit as well for horses as well as sheep and goats also. So wrapping up here, so some of the keys to success is follow those regulatory regulations, right? Follow those guides that are set forth for us. Work closely with our IACUC and IBC committee. Work closely with EH&S. From a CMG standpoint, from a research standpoint, work closely with the University of Tennessee veterinarian, and I rely on experience of other AVs at other institutions that I reach out to periodically to see how they might handle a situation. Those IACUC and IBC site visits, where they go and make sure that animal welfare, make sure that the safety of that space is adequate, and utilizing their regulatory bodies to tell us where an animal project can take place. Is that a BSL-1 project? Is that a BSL-2 project? Communication from the clinical veterinarians, from IACUC to the compliance office, to the clinical veterinarians, to the research teams, back up to the institutional officer here at K-State. And I mean, there's just important communication so that we know what is going on with each and every animal, each and every study here at campus. And then make sure that our animal technicians, caregivers, and research teams, from a safety standpoint, have met their medical surveillance requirements, recognize that they know that the risk associated with each species and agent, make sure they've gone through the proper training for from a handling standpoint, from a disease recognition standpoint, so they know what the signs and symptoms of the disease are, so they can report back to the research team, or they can report back to us as the clinical veterinarians if they're seeing any abnormalities. Understand the containment requirements, what's it required to go in and out of a room, and then I haven't really mentioned it, but have an emergency response procedure. And so we do have that emergency response if there is some sort of natural disaster of some sort, fire in a facility, how we're going to keep our people safe and how we're going to try to keep the animals safe. So I started off this lecture with, so we take care of your animals, and large part is, and you can finish it in a lot of ways, but so you can take long walks together for years to come with yours, right? And so with that, I did not go long, and I will try to answer any questions.
Questions, comments? I had from area code 765. If you're still in the chat room, can you re-ask your question? But the question is, we just received a grant that will be approved by IACUC. Are there looking at OSHA, are there any specific regulations, and are there other specific resources for a lab that's taking on new animal research? So 765, I don't know where you're at, but other resources for a lab that's taking on new.
So I think I have it. Well, trying to. Sorry. ILAR will have a guide for facility. The one I reference here is guide for care and use of laboratory animals, but ILAR will also have a guide for facility use. OSHA would be a good one, but really, I think if you're setting up a lab here or anywhere, IACUC, IBC are going to be instrumental in helping set up those guidelines.
Yeah, and Adam, anything in the chat room? So I know we're recording this. So 765. I know there's another one out there. It's National Academies makes this one, and I know Dr. Grady's seen that. So there's one out there that's still in print. It's been out there a while, and I know it's a reference. Occupational health and safety in the care and use of research animals. So that's one you can also use and share with your IACUC and your new research team. And also too, if you're not in the chat room, go ahead and send Dr. Grady an email or EHS, and we can help you behind the scenes. You got your contact information here?
Yeah, should be on the first slide. I think maybe I don't know how detailed I got it. I guess I don't. We can share that in the chat room right at the end of this though.
Any questions or comments?
Curious, being at a few different institutions in the past, what is your view of the role of EHS on the IACUC?
So the question was my view of the role of EHS on IACUC, and so I will say I think it's instrumental. I mean, I've been in this role for less than 2 years, and I've already reached out for a couple of matters just to Joe and Rachel just to help guide us, right? And because I mean they're experts in certain areas of animal care that I am not an expert in, and so working with them, and so the question on IACUC, and I know Rachel is a member of IACUC, so I think it is important to have that, look at it from a safety standpoint. Any other question?
It might be really loud. It's Rachel. I'm at home. I apologize. I put Dr. Grady's email in the chat for everybody.
Thank you.
Perfect. And I know with that, no other questions or comments. We do have a thank you gift for today, and we'll step forward here with that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And appreciate your time. And for others to get questions, comments, even after the presentation, don't hesitate, contact EHS, contact Dr. Grady, and we'll help you do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for coming.